Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man working as a climatologist gets a report of a place with weird weather. So, what's the forecast there? Because here, it is snowing feathers.
As a climatologist, I spend most of my days just screaming into the void. One academic paper at a time, I start to feel more and more like a doomsday prophet. The end is nigh, we yell from the proverbial rooftops. But honestly, I'm as sick of doing that as you are listening to it. Don't get me wrong, I love my job. I get to see and understand things that others usually take for granted. To see the machinations of the planet come together to explain an unpredictable outcome. To face the storm and say, yeah, I get it. We're learning the language of Mother Nature, her screams, tantrums, agony, and relief. But earlier this year, I was sent to study something new and different. I wouldn't go as far as to say we're bound to the whims of an eccentric millionaire, but at the same time, it wouldn't be too far from the truth. Most of our collective projects are privately funded. Most of the time, we're free to do whatever we please, as long as we make our parent company look good. But sometimes they point us in a direction and ask us to go fetch. We're basically academics on retainer, ready to drop our projects at a moment's notice to service our masters. Yeah, I don't like that metaphor either. One day an article dropped in my inbox. It was sensationalist nonsense. No more than 400 words about fishermen coming back from the sea covered in feathers. They called it feather snow, and they swore to its authenticity, claiming it usually came around every 2 weeks or so. The article played it off as a joke, but I wasn't laughing. I could see who sent it to us, our parent company. We had a short staff meeting, and it turned out everyone had been sent the same article. Someone was heading southeast of Portsmouth to debunk it. Well, it turns out that someone was me. I got set up at a small bed and breakfast. All cynicism aside, the people of New Hampshire are wonderful. They were welcoming and understanding, and without a hint of mean spirit. I felt so open about what I was doing there that I told anyone who asked, and I got very honest responses. Apparently, the feathers now was a known phenomenon that dated back to the 80s. It was more frequent nowadays, but there were articles way back speaking of the same thing. Fishermen who'd gotten caught in it weren't locals, and had called the papers. That resulted in the article we'd seen. The locals knew better. This type of thing happened every now and then. Once I got to talking with the local fishermen, it was made apparent that feather snow was a real thing. Very real. They planned around it, and they avoided it when they could. They'd pull up their nets early and reposition their boats to avoid it. 4 different families of fishermen showed me feathers from the previous falls that they'd saved in jars, and I was allowed to take some home for testing. It dawned on me that these were real people dealing with real consequences. This wasn't some sensationalist nonsense. I sent the feathers in for testing with some of my colleagues. The results were back within a couple of days. 4 different types of gulls, great black-backed, laughing Mew and Franklins, as well as a couple of Forster's tern. Pretty common New Hampshire seaside birds. These weren't some fake duck feathers saved up in a jar just for fun. These were actual, real feathers. Why would they just come falling out of the sky and so frequently? I managed to get a hold of a captain, willing to take me out to sea at the next feather snow. Captain Willard Morrow and his son Robert. They also had 2 fishermen who worked for them, but there was no need to bring them along just to witness the feather snow. Instead, the 3 of us were going alone. I brought all kinds of equipment. I was going to measure everything from cloud density to humidity to freaking radon. I just brought whatever I could. Before I left my room, I also brought along my lucky binoculars. Few things can be as valuable as seeing something up close with your own eyes. And these binoculars had been with me for a long time. Hell, they'd helped me spot the origin point of a tornado once. It was a Sunday afternoon when we pulled up the anchor and set out to sea. Not too far out, but far enough that the coastline started to look like a thread. I double-checked my equipment, and Willard was doing the same. His boat was tried and tested, but all electronics were no more than a couple of years old. Just as I was making sure I'd capture everything, he was making sure we were getting back to land. His son, Robert, spent most of his time texting and counting the minutes. Feathers now wasn't something new and exciting to these people. Around 6 p.m., we saw the first signs. Clouds were gathering, but they were spread thin and white. When it rains, clouds turn black. These were classic cirrus clouds, not something you associate with bad weather or storms. Strong winds, perhaps. I was triple-checking my equipment when Robert poked his head out of the cabin window. He pointed just off the side of the boat. See? There's one. He was right. There was a feather there. How hadn't I noticed it? Then I saw it. Millions of feathers falling in unison, a blanket spread out for miles, tumbling through the air just a couple of feet of distance between them. White feathers calmly touching the ocean. A few of them landed on me, and the boat got covered in them. Robert sighed. He was probably going to have to hose the deck off once we got back to land. There it is, said Willard. Like clockwork. Feathers now. What do you think? No idea, I said, shaking my head. How can it... Every 2 weeks? Yous believe us now? We're not just telling stories anymore? Catching a feather between my fingers, I just stared in disbelief. Of course, I'd thought they were lying. I'd thought it for days, but this was real. This was something you could hold in your hand. Willard just laughed. When I got back to my room, I started trying to make sense of the data. There'd been no increase in humidity. It was as if 1 second there was nothing, then there were feathers. Usually I could tell by the equipment readings when something happened, but there was no cutoff point. There was not a single point where I could say, look, this is where the feathers started to fall. There was nothing like that. They tumbled down, and that was it. Full stop. I talked to my boss about it, explaining that we basically had nothing to go on. He didn't care for it. Either I made something out of this or I didn't. I could debunk it or explain it. There was no middle ground. Now that I'd seen it and taken pictures, there was no question of it anymore. It was authentic, but odd. That was the best way to describe it. Odd. I spent a couple of days just making up a new plan. I spent my nights at the local pub watching football. Go Wildcats, I guess. And taking long walks. I didn't know how to proceed. There are no rule books for this type of thing. I met Willard and his two fishermen at the pub one night. They recommended I talk to a guy named Humphrey, or Hump, and they gave me a number. He was a pilot of a small plane used for displaying banners and messages, a skywriter of sorts. He was a retiree who ran a private pilot course for folks around the area, and he was a bit of a local celebrity. You should see what's going on in the clouds, Willard suggested, and if you're going up, you want Hump to pilot the damn thing. It wasn't a bad idea, and it earned them a couple of beers. Go Wildcats. I'm not afraid of heights, and I'm not afraid of flying, but this time, I was. I got in touch with Hump, and we decided to go up during the next feather snow. He didn't mind. The winds were usually mild, and he had a proposal to help out with anyway. As long as I promised to help him with the lettering, he would help me out, free of charge. How could I say no? He brought me out to this tiny airstrip on the outskirts of town. There was barely any asphalt on the road there, but the strip itself was immaculate. It was privately owned, and Hump took great care of it. As I got there, he was hosing off the plane. We shook hands, had a few laughs, and I helped him with the letters. "Marry me, Jocelyn," it said in bold red letters. When it was time to go, I had to cram myself into the back seat of the plane. There were only 2 seats, and I couldn't bring much equipment. I settled for my camera and my binoculars. Hump, being of a slightly larger than average frame, barely fit in the front seat. Still, he was as used to flying as I was to walking. I know I shouldn't have felt safe in that tiny seat, but there wasn't a hint of insecurity in anything he said. If anything, it was going to be fun. Good old Hump. Cirrus clouds usually rest at about 5,000 to 6,000 meters, and we were going well beyond 8,000. There would be plenty of opportunity for me to see what was going on for myself. Hump even agreed to stay lower than usual. He was, truth be told, a little questioning about why we were going out. Not because he was afraid, but because he didn't get the point. There was nothing out there. Sure, feather snow was weird, but it wasn't malicious. There wasn't a single shipwreck out there because of it. It was too close to shore. But we took to the skies. Man, feeling that big piece of metal lift from the earth is something I'll never get used to. It is one thing to be on a commercial flight, but this thing was tiny. Every twist and turn registered instantly in my stomach, and when Hump started joking about a barrel roll, I nearly gagged. It wasn't the kind of thing you get used to. You either love it instantly or hate it for the rest of your life. I was clearly in the latter category. We circled around town a couple of times, 4 in total. Hump got a text message confirming they'd seen the proposal, and he turned the plane around. I just wanted it to be over. I got a hand cramp from steadying myself, and my ears were ringing from the sound of the propeller. Still, I'm a professional. I wanted to take some pictures and see what was going on. Once we started seeing the cirrus clouds, I got my camera out. It helped to watch the world through a lens. It made it seem less real. I took a few pictures, but wasn't seeing anything in particular. I leaned back to regain my composure when Hump spoke up. "Hey, you seen this?" he asked. "That's a lot of birds." I looked back down as Hump circled the area. He was right. It was a whole lot of birds. Hundreds, maybe thousands. More than there should be. They were circling a particularly thick part of the cloud cover. Hump took us down to get a better view, and I photographed at least a dozen different species, all flying in a circular formation like a ring in the sky. It would have been impossible to see them from the ground. They were hidden by the clouds. They were all of different white plumages, and they kept to a certain part of the sky where the clouds obscured them. "You seeing this?" he repeated. "What are they doing?" "Same as us," I laughed. "Either sightseeing or fishing." I brought out my binoculars to get a better look. Then I saw it. In the center of the bird ring, where the clouds were the thickest, there was a black spot. It hadn't been there a few seconds ago. A big circle-like shape. I photographed it, putting my camera on max zoom. What happened next will haunt me. A white circle appeared inside the black spot. As Hump took us up, I realized I was staring at an eye. An eye the length of 2 fishing boats. In the literal blink of an eye, thousands of birds just disappeared. Their bodies were gone, leaving only feathers behind. Feathers that slowly wafted down like snow. Then, the eye turned its attention to us. I could see a faint outline in the clouds, like a shimmering celestial flatfish, too large to comprehend. I started hyperventilating, burying my head between my knees, staring into myself instead of out the window. I pounded the back of Hump's seat, stammering to take us away. Nothing happened. I forced myself to look up, only to see the front seat empty. Nothing but the clothes remained of Hump as the plane started to turn, fast. What happened next were the most panicked seconds of my life. Trying to wrap my head around what I'd seen, trying to pull the flight stick up, trying to get loose and climb into the front seat, all while plummeting towards the open ocean. I sat on Hump's warm clothes as the ocean came rushing towards me. I don't know how I survived. The crash was devastating. I remember crawling out of a wreckage, being cut by hot metal, leaning against a life preserver. There was an intense cold, followed by a pleasant warmth. I threw up at least 3 times, and I passed out just as something shone a light in my face. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital. The crash was pretty big local news, but that's all it was. No mentions of eyes in the sky, no mentions of the feather snow. No, apparently Hump was a known alcoholic who did sightseeing flights without a license. My name was spared from the articles, but there were plenty of mentions of an implied rich snob who got his comeuppance. I haven't been back since, and my physical therapy is progressing slower than it should. It feels like that thing is still out there, looking for me. It has seen me, and now it wants to know where I went. It wants to do something with me. The entire me, not just my body. It wants to take me away, leaving nothing but a shell behind. My feathers, if you will. There have been no more reports of feathers now outside the coast southeast of Portsmouth. Apparently it stopped after Hump disappeared. But just last night, as I was struggling to sleep, I saw it. Clear as day, a single white feather dancing towards the ground. I think it's here.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man who recently purchased a house discovers that it has a frog problem. So, even though we're on a budget, we should have bought the damn frogs.
I live in a small town called Tomskog, Minnesota. It ain't a big town, but it is what I've learned to call home. Just south of Fergus Falls, just north of St. Gall. I want to share something weird about this town that started just a few months after we moved in, and it has been getting progressively worse. I think I have things under control as it stands, but I'm not sure. I think I could use your opinion on this. My family and I moved here in 2019. I got a job at one of the larger warehouses on the outskirts of town. Biggest refrigerated warehouse in the state. I moved here with my wife Laura and 2 daughters, Beth and Jane, all the way from Chicago. We all agreed on one thing when we got here. The entire town looks like something straight out of the 60s. The town has a long tradition of refrigeration and cold storage. Back in the 60s, the town produced a large portion of the milk canisters used by traveling milkmen. You know, the kind you've seen in the movies. People who would deliver cold milk in the morning straight to the door. That milk came transported in O'Sullivan's canisters in bright orange and purple letters. They still use the same font, and those milk canisters can be seen all around town. It is a point of pride, but those days are long gone. There are no milkmen left in Tomskog, but there are a few places that still use that aesthetic as a theme. There's Butterman's Biscuits on Main Street, along with the Rosemary's Dairy, an ice cream stall in the mall. Those places always have someone dressed up as a milkman. The high school also has a milkman-themed mascot, sort of a cowman minotaur thing with a creepy smile. Beth isn't a fan. We had been here for about 6 months when we got a knock on the door. We weren't expecting company, and by then we were fairly settled in. We'd had our share of neighbors coming by already. That time was over. Laura called me over as she opened the door. I was shocked to see a young man, no older than 17, dressed up in that classic all-white milkman outfit. He waved a clipboard at us with a big smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Hives," he smiled. "I'm Tom, from O'Sullivan's. Great to meet you." "Nice to meet you, Tom," chuckled my wife, giving me a side eye. "That's a great uniform." "Just great," I agreed. "You're too kind. I'm just here to see if you're interested to sign up for any of our weekly deliveries. I'm sorry we didn't get to you sooner, but there have been all kinds of holdups on the factory floor." "I don't, said Laura, looking at me. "I don't think anything comes to mind," I butted in. "Not at the top of my head." Of course," nodded Tom. "Maybe I could leave this with you so you can look it over at your own leisure?" He held out a single piece of paper. I took it, we wished him well, and locked the door. Laura couldn't stop laughing and swore she was going to get me one of those outfits. The paper itself was left on the kitchen counter for a few days, until my youngest, Jane, found herself reading it out of sheer boredom one morning. She counted everything on the list, reading it out loud. Most of it was fairly ordinary. You could have eggs delivered, butter, or a few select flavors of ice cream, mostly Ben & Jerry's. There was also sparkling water, fresh juice, and hey, even good old milk. There were also a few dried goods like baking soda and flour. Then at the very bottom of the page was this one line that I couldn't believe. "Frogs," said Jane, my youngest. "It says frogs here." "That can't be right," chuckled Laura. "Let me see." She held it up to me as I drank my morning coffee. There it was, bright as day. Frogs, with an asterisk. Nowhere on the page did it say what the asterisk was for. It was, by far, the weirdest thing I'd seen in this town. Maybe someone in town had a thing for French cuisine, but having frozen frogs hand-delivered to your front door? That's weird. And if it was a cooking thing, why were there no snails? My wife and I talked about it extensively for about a week. At the parent-teacher conference, we tried talking to the other parents about it, but most of them didn't seem to know what we were talking about. They thought we were joking. Some of them had O'Sullivan's regular deliveries, but most were just once a month, and only for some of the cooking basics. Apparently their fresh cream was to die for. I called up the O'Sullivans the following Monday. It only took a single ring before someone answered. Not a machine either, a real person. We exchanged pleasantries and I explained that I'd gotten a sign-up sheet from Tom, and they were delighted to have me call back. It was all very pleasant until I brought up the frogs and the asterisk. "Oh, you got one of the houses out by the lake?" "Not really by the lake, more in the vicinity of it." That's why it is there. Just in case you need some frogs, unless you have your own. Why would I need frogs? Could you please explain in clear terms why? Sir, I'm sorry, but I need you to lower your voice. I'm not proud to say I didn't. The conversation turned sour, and I was close to flinging my phone across the room. Laura calmed me down. She told me she'd talked to the realtor about it, and they'd assured me that while there was a lake nearby, there were no reports of troublesome frogs in the area. For all intents and purposes, it all seemed like a mistake. As autumn turned to winter, we forgot about the whole thing. It wasn't until spring that we got another visit from Tom, and this time we weren't home. He left another sign-up sheet on our front door, and I tore it to shreds. Laura thought I was overreacting. Tomskog is beautiful in the winter, but the snow can be a real problem. A lot of the driveways go slightly uphill, so even a tiny bit of ice can keep you from getting to work on time. You might think people don't need as much refrigeration in the winter, but you'd be wrong. Sure, you might not want ice cream delivered to your front door, but there are still goods that needs to be transported across the country, especially during the holidays. I was working overtime most of December and didn't even give myself the time to worry about the delivery boy from O'Sullivan's. I was too busy with everyday life, getting the kids to school, pushing my car out of the driveway, getting a babysitter once every other week for a night out. The usual. But winter turns to spring and things changed. I was getting water for my morning coffee when I noticed the pipes rumbling. It sounded like a blockage. As I was about to smack it, something came flying out of the pipe. Something small and black, straight into the garbage disposal. The water flowed just fine afterwards, but I couldn't help but worry. I figured the pipes were just old. Of course, it wasn't that simple. Over the coming weeks, we started to notice things around the house and yard. The grass outside was slowly turning brown, and the graveled path from the house to the driveway was turning into mud. I started waking up to the smell of wet wood drifting in through our bedroom window, and my daughters would come in at night complaining about mosquitoes. It all escalated to the point where I woke up one night from a mosquito bite on my nose. I went into the kitchen to grab a glass of juice and calm my nerves when I suddenly slipped. Full-on 90-degree flip, landing on my back, staring at the ceiling. I checked my foot, only to see it covered in blood. I'd stepped on a frog. I'd squished it and flung the remains straight across the floor like a banana peel. The thing still twitched as my wife threw it out. I had to shower for a solid 40 minutes before I felt even remotely clean again. Over the following days, it just got worse. I would awaken in the middle of the night by the sound of croaking. It was always somewhere nearby. I could hear something wet slapping against our wooden floors. Sometimes I'd hear something bumping against the furniture, or even the bedposts. I started doing frog checks before going to bed. I rarely found more than one, maybe two, but as soon as the lights were out, we could hear them, croaking, slapping around. It all came to a head one night when Beth, our oldest daughter, came screaming into our bedroom. "There's someone in the house! There's someone in the..." I was up in a heartbeat. Laura got the phone and started calling the police. Jane crawled into bed as I loaded up my Beretta. "Jane!" I yelled. "Jane, get in here!" There was no response. I gave Laura a look and ran out into the hallway, still in my underwear. I could see through the main hallway all the way to the front door. It was all dark, the lights were still off. The half moon illuminated a small silhouette in the doorway. A child, but not Jane. That, and 1,000 glaring eyes along the floor. Someone was screaming outside, "Jane." I took one step and felt a frog crushed under my foot. I could feel their grabby hands twitch between my toes as I struggled to stay up. Just as I tried calling out for my daughter, I lost my footing and fell face first into the floor. Frogs. Everywhere. They were getting in my hair, pushing against my ears, trying to force themselves onto me. They pushed against my lips, my nose, my eyes, biting with toothless mouths. I got back up and threw them off of me, only to see that the silhouette in the doorway was gone. I wiped the frog gunk off of my face and ran outside, squishing frogs with every step. I could feel them nipping at my leg hairs. It was freezing outside, and the mud was deeper than usual. The croaking outside was deafening. Small, tiny croaks. Big, bawling croaks. croaks that seemed to stretch on forever, like screams. Out of the cacophony of sounds, I managed to pinpoint my daughter. Gun in hand, I ran straight into the woods. By now, my heart was pounding so loud that I couldn't even hear the croaking. I had only walked that same trail a few times prior. I knew where it was leading me. I should have known. I ran for at least 10 minutes, using only moonlight to guide me. I screamed myself hoarse, trying to find Jane, and every now and then I could hear her in the distance. I would trip on branches, step on sharp rocks, tear myself open against pine and birch, but I would just keep going. I pushed myself so hard I didn't even notice my hand cramping against the trigger of the gun. Luckily, the safety was on. The lake is usually a calming sight. A small freshwater lake, perfect for fishing, with a big rock in the center. You can usually tie up your boat there and take a dip in the summer. I'd done so a few times before with the girls, but the lake was teeming with frogs. The forest was booming with croaking, and I couldn't see Jane anywhere. Suddenly, something breached the surface of the lake. I heard a loud, gargling scream, and I knew it was her. I ran as fast as I could, diving headfirst into the water. The moonlight reflected against a handful of tiny eyes under the surface, tiny legs kicking to get close to me. The water was dense with mud and debris, and I couldn't see further than a couple of feet. I reached for air and got back down. I was halfway across the lake when I could finally see something just below the surface. In the moonlight, it looked like a jellyfish, but I knew better. That was Jane's pajamas. The rest is a bit of a blur. I dove and somehow got a hold of her. As I was pulling her to the surface, I could see something large looking up at me from the bottom. Eyes the size of headlights, holding Jane's entire leg in its mouth. It was gentle, almost surprised to see me. As soon as I tugged her loose, it retreated to the bottom of the lake, those large eyes turning black as the light retreated. I dragged Jane up to the rock in the middle of the lake. She wasn't breathing. I performed CPR, screaming for help. I was panicking so bad that I couldn't keep count. I kept shouting, screaming, crying, begging, but in the end it was just her and me. As she finally coughed up a lungful of lake water, along with a tadpole, I held her close. All around the lake I could see little silhouettes staring at us. Short, hazy shadows, the size of children. They were croaking. We didn't tell the entire story to the police. There was no way they would have believed us. Instead, they figured it had been a case of night fright and that Jane had gotten lost in the woods. We just let them believe what they wanted. We called Tom from O'Sullivan's back. He came the very next day, all dressed up in white. We asked if he would recommend us ordering the frogs. Once is enough, he smiled. Most of the old folks who live by the lake knows to keep a frog or two in the house. How come, I asked. If there are already frogs in the house, there's no need for any more frogs to come in. He nodded, tapping his forehead. So they stay away. So we get frozen frogs, and then we're good. They're just hibernating. Just go ahead and put them somewhere real nice, and I'm sure it'll all be just fine. I signed us up for a single delivery of 4 frogs. Tom seemed pleased. As he was about to leave, I stopped him. I gotta ask, are we the only ones in town who need this? Tom looked past me, locking eyes with my youngest daughter. For a few more years, Mr. Hives, unless you want to take your chances. We got 4 frogs delivered. I set them up in a nice terrarium in the hallway. Jane barely even remembers that night and doesn't seem as shaken up as the rest of us. Hell, I've seen her play with the damn things. But me? I get the shakes every time I hear them croak. There haven't been a single frog on our property since. The grass is green again, and the graveled path stays graveled even during bad rains. But sometimes, at night, I swear I can see those hazy outlines of children along the edges of my property. They croak.